I had often seen my husband with our maid, but I chose to remain silent. Whenever I confronted him, he would beat me. A few months later, my husband fell into a coma, and then, in his presence, I was going through the most harrowing phase of my life, forced to witness my husband, my love, with someone else right before my eyes. This dark chapter of my life felt like an unending torment, with each passing moment suffocating me like a curse. My husband, Noman, whom I loved deeply, would shamelessly engage with our 16-year-old maid in ways that made it hard for me to breathe. One evening, after putting my child to sleep, I stepped out of my room. Suddenly, I heard Noman's voice coming from the kitchen. I was surprised. He was home earlier than usual. It wasn't even 7 p.m., and he typically returned around 8. Curious, I followed his voice to the kitchen door. What I saw inside left me in utter shock. My husband had his arms around the maid's waist and was leaning over her neck. Tears welled up in my eyes, and in a trembling voice, I managed to ask, "No, man, what is going on here?" Startled, he turned to look at me, a smirk spreading across his face. "Nothing," he said. "Go mind your own business." Then, without hesitation, he turned his attention back to the maid. It felt like a dagger piercing my heart. I stepped inside, grabbed the maid by the hand, and pulled her away. "Don't you have any shame? How can you do this right in front of me and with a servant?" I demanded. No Man's smirk grew wider. "You're right," he said. "I shouldn't do this in front of you. That's why I should take Noreen to the bedroom instead. Come, Noreen." He grabbed the maid's hand and walked toward our bedroom. In an instant, he picked up our sleeping child from the bed, placed him in my arms, and shut the door behind him. I felt like the sky had collapsed on me. I banged on the door crying, but he didn't open it. My child, who was only 2 years old, woke up and started crying as well. Holding him close, I sank to the floor by the door, tears streaming down my face, knowing that my world had fallen apart. This wasn't the first time I had noticed my husband's inappropriate behavior with the maid. I had seen him hovering around her, touching her under flimsy pretenses. But I had ignored it. Today, however, he had crossed all limits, taking what was rightfully mine and giving it to someone else, someone we had hired to help care for our child. I cried for hours, sitting by the door until it finally opened. Noreen stepped out, her face glowing with happiness, her eyes sparkling. Her cheeks were flushed pink, and she looked content. I stared at her in disbelief. How could she so easily take my place? How could she find joy in this illicit relationship? Overwhelmed with rage, I stood up, grabbed her by her hair, and asked, "Don't you have any shame? You're just a maid in this house, hired to look after my child. How could you betray me like this?" Noreen looked at me with an unsettling calm and said, "When you can't fulfill your husband's desires, it's only natural for him to look elsewhere. I'm here all day, young, beautiful, and I understand his needs. That's why he gave me your place." Her words, her tone, it was as if she had become a completely different person. I stood there stunned, unable to comprehend how everything had unraveled so quickly, leaving me in a void of betrayal and despair. This wasn't the Noreen who had come to work at my house 2 years ago. This was someone else entirely, someone who had stolen everything from me. She now claimed my husband as hers with such confidence, as though I was the outsider and she was Noman's wife. Her hair was still clutched in my hand when Noman stepped out of the room. Seeing the scene, he walked over to us, pried her hair free from my grasp, and warned me, "If you ever misbehave with Noreen again, you will see the worst of me. If you have a problem with her, take your child and leave this house. But don't you dare lay a hand on Noreen." I looked at my husband with tearful eyes. How easily he had told me to leave my home. That was when it struck me. If a woman doesn't have her parents' support, if her family isn't strong, she faces days like this. Either her in-laws or her husband will eventually make her feel that she is helpless in surviving only because of them. No man knew this truth about me. He knew I had no parents, no siblings to turn to. That's why he was confident I would endure every injustice. And sadly, he was right. When he threatened me with divorce, I swallowed my pain in silence because I had no other choice. Where would I go if my husband threw me out of the house? I had nowhere to turn, and so I became blind to everything happening before my eyes. Right in front of me, No Man smiled at Noreen and said, "Be ready, we're going out for dinner tonight." Noreen immediately smiled and nodded, then headed toward the kitchen. A little while later, she came to me and said, "Can you give me your red sari? No Man said I should wear your net sari for dinner with him." I stared blankly at her. She had already taken my husband. What was a sari in comparison? I said nothing and simply gestured toward the wardrobe. She strutted over, her slim waist swaying, and pulled out the sari before walking away. I just stood there watching her go. Sometime later, my son began crying. I left the room to check on him, but the sight before me left me paralyzed. Wearing my sari and my jewelry, Noreen looked like a fairy. And my husband? He was kneeling at her feet, putting sandals on her. I walked toward them in slow, lifeless steps. Noreen looked at me with a smile and said, "This sari looks better on me than it ever did on you." Noman nodded in agreement. Then they both stood up. Noman placed his hand firmly on Noreen's bare back, gave me one final look, and walked out with her. I collapsed onto the sofa, unable to move, feeling like my entire world had been destroyed. Life had turned upside down so quickly that nothing was left. Not after the death of my in-laws. Everything was gone. Just 2.5 years ago, things were so different. When I married Noman, I was overjoyed. Everyone envied my luck. Despite coming from a poor family, I was marrying into such a wealthy one. Noman had his own business, a grand mansion, a car, every luxury imaginable. It was a dream come true, and everyone in the family was astonished by my good fortune. My parents were ecstatic, and my father spared no expense for the wedding. Everything was perfect, and as a bride, I looked stunning. People couldn't stop admiring me. On our wedding night, when Noman entered the room, even he couldn't help but praise my beauty. I was indeed very beautiful. Perhaps that's why Noman's family had chosen me. But just a few days into our marriage, I began to realize my husband's flirtatious nature. Whenever we attended events, Noman would show more interest in other women than in me. When I questioned him about it, he would accuse me of being overly suspicious. "You're from a lower-class family," he would say. "That's why you're always doubting everything." His words silenced me, and I learned to stay quiet. A few months into our marriage, I discovered I was pregnant. The news of the baby brought immense joy, and for a while it felt like Noman had changed. He abandoned all his bad habits and focused solely on me. "Just give me a son," he would say repeatedly. "I need an heir." When our son was finally born, it was the happiest moment of Noman's life. But the birth was complicated. I barely survived. I had returned from the brink of death, and the experience left me weak and frail. My once vibrant complexion faded, my health deteriorated, and I became a shadow of the woman I used to be. It didn't take long for Noman's affection to wane. "This isn't the woman I married," he said one day, his words cutting me deeply. "You've changed. I don't even feel like looking at you anymore." I was stunned. I had given him the greatest joy of his life, a child, and risked my life to do so. Yet here he was, criticizing my appearance and my body. His shallow mindset broke my heart, but I didn't have the luxury to dwell on it. Between caring for my child and managing the household, I had no time for myself. I thought that hiring a full-time maid might help. If someone could take care of the baby and household chores, I could focus on regaining my strength and health. Our old maid Rashida had been unwell and was taking frequent leaves, barely able to handle the workload. When I discussed the idea of hiring someone, Rashida suggested, "I can bring my daughter from the village. She's a sweet, innocent 14-year-old and can stay here full-time. She'll manage all your chores and you won't have to worry about anything." I trusted Rashida and agreed. The idea of having a young girl to help full-time seemed like a blessing, so I gave my approval. Rashida went back to her village and brought her daughter, Noreen, to our home. At first, Noreen seemed like a blessing. She was obedient, hardworking, and innocent, or so I thought. Little did I know that bringing Noreen into my home would lead to the greatest regret of my life. Over time, my husband's attention began shifting toward her. It started with small things, his eyes lingering on her, casual touches that I ignored at first. But soon his actions became bolder, And to my horror, Noreen encouraged them. She welcomed his advances, seeing in him a chance for wealth and comfort. Before long, what I thought was a passing infatuation turned into a full-blown relationship. My husband had fallen for Noreen, a girl half his age. She didn't hesitate to take everything from me. My home, my husband, my dignity. The Noreen I had welcomed into my home, thinking she was an innocent child, had proven that not everyone is worthy of trust. I still remember the day she arrived. My son was just born, and I was recovering from the trauma of childbirth. Rashida had fallen seriously ill and announced she would be leaving to return to her village for good. Desperate, I begged her to stay, but she told me she didn't have the strength to continue. "I can't stay, but I can send my daughter to help you," she said. "She's just a 14-year-old girl, innocent and hardworking. She'll do all the chores, and you won't have to worry." I had no idea that by agreeing to Rashida's suggestion, I was inviting a storm into my life, one that would eventually leave me shattered and alone. When Noreen first came to our home, she was wide-eyed with amazement, taking in everything around her. It was her first experience in the city, and her innocence was apparent. She would ask questions about everything and eagerly ran to complete any task I assigned her. She even took full responsibility for caring for my child. Noreen was a bright, lively girl, beautiful, but not so much at the time that I felt threatened by her presence. I never feared that my husband might notice her. But living in my home, enjoying good food and all the comforts, she began to blossom, turning into a flower so radiant that it could burn anyone who got too close. And that's exactly what she did. With her newfound beauty, she captured my husband's heart. At first, when I noticed her lingering around Noman, I thought she was simply doing her job. It took me a while to realize her true intentions. She wasn't just fulfilling her duties. She was deliberately trying to win him over. Noreen may have been innocent when she arrived, but the allure of city life changed her. She quickly learned that if she wanted to secure a comfortable future, she had to control Noman. When she was new to our house, she would often admire my clothes and jewelry, picking them up to examine them closely. She liked everything I owned, and I even gave her a few things as gifts. Little did I know that her desires extended beyond my belongings. She had set her sights on my husband, too. What Noreen did was something I could never have imagined. In her pursuit of comfort and luxury, she set my world on fire. And Noman, being the kind of man he was, made it all too easy for her. His parents had married him to someone like me, a modest, quiet girl, because they knew he needed someone who wouldn't challenge him. For a short time after the birth of our son, Noman behaved. But once Noreen became a part of our lives, he reverted to his old ways. When I tried to keep him away from her, he resorted to violence. At first he would sneak around with her, but soon he stopped hiding. He would openly hold her hand and take her to the bedroom while I sat outside, awake all night. Even at dinners, Noreen took my place by his side, as though she were his wife. They stayed out late together, and while Noreen still performed her household duties, she spent all her free time indulging in luxuries with my husband. And I stayed silent, watching everything unfold before my eyes. But as they say, God's justice is silent but certain. One day it struck with full force. Noman had a terrible accident. He suffered severe head injuries, leaving him unable to move or speak. While he could see, hear, and feel everything, he was completely paralyzed. His eyelids fluttered and tears streamed down his face when I spoke to him. But his hands, feet, and lips remained still. The doctor said, "He is in a kind of coma. We cannot predict if or when he will recover." Noman's accident was like a storm that destroyed my world. He was my entire life, the sole breadwinner of our family. With him bedridden, everything began to fall apart. I couldn't manage his business, and it slowly crumbled, leaving us with nothing. And Noreen, the same Noreen who had entangled him in her web, lured by his wealth, suddenly faced a very different reality. When I couldn't pay Noreen's salary on time, she made an excuse about her mother being ill and left for her village. With her gone, the burden of household chores and caring for my incapacitated husband fell entirely on my shoulders. As the cost of his medicines and care began to drain my resources, I found myself in a state of deep despair. With a 2-year-old child in my arms, I felt utterly helpless and alone. Despite everything Noman had done, his betrayals and infidelity, I didn't leave him. I continued to care for him, even though this was the same man who had flaunted his affairs with other women right before my eyes. Now he was entirely at my mercy. One day, Noman's friend Arsalan visited our home. He had come to see Noman, but as soon as he saw me, his intentions became clear. "Bobby, sister-in-law, you're so young and beautiful," he remarked. "Noman was a fool to chase after Noreen." I was stunned. Arsalan knew about Noreen. He went on to reveal that Noman had often brought Noreen to gatherings with his friends. Hearing this, I felt deeply humiliated, as though I had been stripped of all dignity. Arsalan then got up and came closer. He held my hand, took out his wallet, and placed some money in my palm. "Don't worry," he said. "Noman is an old friend of mine. I know you need help right now, and I want to support you." Before I could react, he gently tucked a stray lock of hair behind my ear and softly kissed my forehead. I froze, my entire being aflame with shock and disbelief. I couldn't have imagined Noman's friend doing something like this. My eyes darted to Noman, who was sitting silently, unable to move, but his tears said it all. He had seen everything and was fully aware of what was happening. His anguish brought back memories of my own pain. How many times had I watched him kiss Noreen, hold her in his arms, and take her to our bedroom? For a moment, it felt like fate had given me a chance to take revenge. I wrapped my arm around Arsalan's waist and rested my head on his shoulder, letting my tears flow as I spoke about my loneliness. I knew exactly what Arsalan wanted, and I decided not to resist. As I leaned on his shoulder, he lost all self-control. Right in front of Noman, Arsalan sat me down on the sofa and began whispering sweet words, touching me the way Noman used to touch Noreen. For what felt like an eternity, he stayed close, making his intentions clear. Before leaving, Arsalan said he would return that night. As he walked out, I turned to look at Noman with a sense of triumph. The war he had started, I had finally won, or at least that's how it felt. That night, Arsalan returned. I was sitting next to Noman, holding my 2-year-old son. Seeing Arsalan enter, a smile lit up my face. I placed my son down and went to change into the same red sari that Noreen had once borrowed from me. In that sari, I looked breathtaking. My complexion had regained its glow, and the lingering effects of childbirth had faded. I knew I looked irresistible, and I could feel the fire of vengeance burning within me, clouding my sense of right and wrong. Without hesitation, I walked into Arsalan's arms, right in front of Noman. His tears flowed freely, but instead of guilt or regret, they brought me a strange sense of satisfaction. I knew he was in agony, but I no longer cared. That night, Arsalan stayed with me for hours before leaving. This became a regular occurrence. Soon, Noman's other friends started visiting under the guise of checking on him, but their true intentions were clear. They spent time with me, and I let them. I never hesitated. In front of my husband, I would embrace his friends, rest my head on their chests, and pour out my loneliness. They made me feel wanted. I thought to myself, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was merely doing what my husband had done to me. But just 15 to 20 days later, my son became gravely ill. He was bedridden, burning with a high fever. I realized to my horror that my obsession with seeking revenge on my husband had made me neglect my child. I was too preoccupied with my anger and pain to notice his needs. As I juggled housework and caring for my son one day, I tripped over something and fell badly. The pain was excruciating, and I screamed in agony, unable to get up. I suspected I had fractured my ankle. To my utter astonishment, my cries seemed to bring Noman back to his senses. He staggered toward me, calling my name, his voice filled with desperation. He knelt beside me, cradling my injured foot and asking if I was badly hurt. Forgetting my pain, I simply stared at him, stunned. He was no longer in a coma. Slowly, realization dawned on him as well. He sat silently for a moment before breaking into tears, sobbing uncontrollably. I couldn't hold back my own tears, unsure of how to react. I had crossed so many boundaries in my quest for revenge. The things I had done were unforgivable. But then Noman did something unexpected. He pulled me into an embrace and apologized. He confessed his shame for everything he had done acknowledging that my actions were a result of the fire of vengeance he had lit. Despite his remorse, I couldn't meet his eyes. I was consumed with guilt. What he had done to me was a sin, but I hadn't taken the high road. I had sinned as well. I looked down in shame, unable to speak. No man took my hand and said, "What you did was wrong, but in a way it's my fault. I pushed you to this. Let's not dwell on the past." I now realize how gravely I sinned. Look at what happened to me. Noreen, the one I left you for, abandoned me the moment my wealth was gone. But you, despite everything, stayed by my side and cared for me. I am forever grateful to you. We both apologized to each other, and in that moment, we forgave one another. No man learned that outward beauty and charm are fleeting. True worth lies in a person's character. And I learned that vengeance brings no peace. If one seeks peace, one must learn to forgive. My desire for revenge had dragged me into the depths of sin, but when I forgave my husband, I found tranquility. Years later, Rashida visited our home. I was shocked to see how frail and ill she looked. She knelt at my feet, weeping and asking for forgiveness. Through her tears, she told me that Noreen had passed away. She explained that Noreen had contracted a fatal disease at a young age, likely a consequence of her actions. In her greed for wealth, Noreen had ensnared many others, and it ultimately cost her her life. Hearing this, I was stunned. A beautiful young girl had lost everything because of her sins. In that moment, I forgave Noreen from the depths of my heart. Today, my husband and I are living a good life together. We cannot change the past, but we strive to move forward and let it go. That's the truth of our lives now.